grounded in the experiences, lived experiences of impacted communities rather than, market-led and industry-driven approaches. So the question that we ask is, how can the experiences of marginalized women, youth, and other communities shape the conversation around the gender? When we say we are transitioning, what does that mean? That also means then that gender justice is a cross-cutting pillar of our work. What does that mean in a context of energy poverty? What does that mean in a context that was already extractive and silencing of certain voices and pushing of certain voices to the margins? When we are saying we are transition justly, what does that look like in practice? The problem is not that people aren't thinking and innovating or aren't coming up with solutions. The problem is that we live in a society that silences certain voices deliberately. And so ours become a mission to say, how do we unsilence ourselves? How do we bring ourselves back from the margins to the center of conversations? And some of you have begun to do that work, and we are just honored as Oxfam and others to be partnering with people that are already exploring solutions. And why is it that resources aren't flowing to these solutions that exist in communities? Could be that not enough light is being shown on the innovations, so we must then begin to support and strengthen and scale. And that's the work that the Ubuntu Energy Project is hoping to do. From the AACJ work, then we formed the South African Activist for Climate Justice, which is then the movement that I was speaking to. What that gave birth to is what we are now calling the Ubuntu Energy Project, which really partners with people who are exploring alternative energy solutions at community level. When we've done the talking and when we've done the engaging, right, we must remember that we must come up with solutions. And solutions are there. There are people that are already exploring solutions, right? How we begin to shine the light on those. And how do we begin to scale? And what does fundraising look like for organizations like ours? I'm going to also keep taking Greenpeace because you're the other NGO in the house. How do we raise funds in ways that journey with communities, right? And how do we support the ideas that already exist? Pauline, Patrick, Mamswe, Carlos, people that are already exploring solutions.
As my colleagues have mentioned, I'm from Greenpeace Africa. I'm based here in Joburg, but I work across the continent. So what I had planned the workshop honestly, and there were comrades online, so I changed it to a newspaper dispatch. So at least we're making front page this time around. So thank you so much, Mandisa and colleagues, to trust me with setting the scene and bringing in why is it important for us, particularly the youth from Africa, but youth from South Africa to craft our messages and fit into that Santa Marta moment. It's important to realize that the climate crisis or the extreme weather events that are facilitated by the climate crisis or that are where the climate crisis expresses itself are transboundary and compounding. If we can remember just the recent floods that happened in Mozambique in the last 2-3 years, then the floods, of course, were in Mozambique, but of course they come into South Africa in KZN. I want to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting on the land that has felt the weight of extractive for generations. The land whose communities know more than most what it means to bear the cost of what they did not choose. Today we gather not just as activists but as witnesses. witnesses to a world that is changing in ways that are no longer abstract. It's quite clear. Measured not in degrees on the graph, but in lives, in homes that washed away, harvests that never came, and loved ones that did not survive. And we gather at a moment when the language of climate justice is being used more loudly than ever, that's greenwashing. While the reality on the ground and in our communities tells a more complicated, sometimes more dangerous story. So maybe roughly 221 plus million people affected by climate disasters in Africa, the entire continent, between 2021 and 2025. 28,759 disaster-related deaths. That's 3 times the past 5 years total, as I mentioned earlier. 2 to 5% of the GDP lost annually by African countries to climate extremes. And $30 to $50 billion is an annual cost of adaptation needed by sub-Saharan Africa over the next decade. So we can see how much the toll on people, but also the economic toll that is contributed to climate-related crisis. And I think it's important for us to really hold that as we are crafting messages, because if you pay attention closely, the messages that come out of COP, we like silos. We don't like holding complexities as communities, but mostly leaders don't like complex things. They'll divide things. There will be a portfolio for each thing, but none of that really works in real life because things are much more convoluted than that. So it's important for us as young people to have that way of holding this knowledge and crafting messages that will really bring those complexities to life. That's all. I think it's important for us to really pay attention to these costs, because it will be like, okay, government can afford that. But that money could create jobs, could do other things, could uplift education, etc. There are many things that can be done by this money or resources that are going back into building infrastructure that was already there. So the emotional cost is real and long-lasting. Communities in Maphumulo and in Kranskop, that's where the flood that happened in Durban, because for some reason in 2022 the news forecast only in Durban, but the greater KZN was affected kakhulu. So the communities in Maphumulo and Kranskop describe being left physically, economically, and emotionally scared. Grief that is invisible compared to the economic damage, but no less devastating for the people who carry it. Again, the emotional cost that is at the back of each event. When we look at the news and the statistics, and when we talk about these issues in rooms like this, it normally doesn't. It doesn't make it to the face that someone is really grieving, and if a house is swept this year, and then 2 years later, after just finishing, it gets swept away again, and then 3 years later, just finally, and then another one strikes. You see the level of tolerance and how we must keep on going with these pains. And mind you, our system generally doesn't cater for this emotional part of it. We can get relief if then government does its job. It's told our packages and so on. But you hardly hear of emotional support and psychological support that is at the back of this. We expect people to just survive. But we camp and survive. That's quite important to hold, and because it affects on how we frame our futures and how young people grow into the system. that is either not taking care of the emotions, and then we see violence and many other things that are paying our communities. Because all these things, at least the climate crisis or the weather events that we see, are closely linked to all these things that we don't really have language to bring together yet. So, why does this matter for South Africa in particular? Of course, we know that our economy has been built on coal for centuries, and we are pushing for the just transition. Our work, I didn't even give you a background of what exactly do I do, but I hope I'll get to that shortly. But it's quite important for South Africa to frame what transition means for us, at what speed, and who is in the room, which I think is the main reason why we are here. So, people of Mpumalanga did not build the economy for themselves. They've been carrying the entire country with them. And in that process, they've been breathing the dirtiest air more than anyone in this country. And then when people, someone in KZN in the Western Cape would say, and I've heard that a lot in rooms and in conversations and in debates when I've been fortunate enough to be in quite tangible policy debates with people who are in power. And they are very arrogant about the 200 years of coal that is in the ground. And if you step back, they have a point. Who are we transitioning for? At whose expense? But at the same time, can we afford to stay in the model while the whole world is moving ahead? At the same time, we transition just because everyone is saying we must transition. Then the question for speed, and what speed are we transitioning? Who are we leaving behind? Command is a beautiful example of speed. I think it's important to notice that, to pay attention that Mpumalanga paid the price for the coal economy. And now, without adequate support, it risks to pay the price for the transition too. And this room, we need to really hold that and craft whatever messaging around that. Really be aware that a certain part of this country has been carrying us through losing loved ones day after day, breathing unclean air for centuries. If we talk about just transition, where does it start? How does it look like? And I think if we were to really look at just transition from a Mpumalanga lens, we might land in a better place, if not in a correct place, but at least close enough. For me, this is an invitation just to really shape our minds as we look at the Santa Marta moment, but not only look at it from our privilege and I don't know, informed perspectives, but really hold the entire reality of us as young people across the spectrum. Right. Our questions or our demands are quite clear, they are not abstract this time around. Will the transition be designed with frontline communities or around them? Just understanding what is Mpumalanga, but it's South Africa, and then we do something that, oh, by the way, let's remember Mpumalanga and Limpopo. For some reason, we always forget Limpopo, that it has a lot of mines and air pollution. We always talk about Mpumalanga. Of course, Mpumalanga is home to, is it 9 out of 11 power stations? But it doesn't excuse that Limpopo is suffering equally, or at least somewhere there. Now, will the minerals needed for clean energy be mined justly? That's a very important question on our messaging. Because if you talk about just transition, it means there is some mining of specific minerals, and we know that mining has not beautiful history in our country and across the continent anyway. So the main question, how are we doing this differently? Are we just saying that we need green minerals but plunging communities back into the resource curse that has been happening? Or will we simply swap one resource curse with another. Right. Will Mpumalanga be supported /Limpopo from my perspective or abandoned? Will Africa Youth be heard or consulted just for formality? These are important questions that we need to ask ourselves in the context of what we know, and what we know is coming, right? So, in closing, young people from the global south are not simply victims of the climate crisis. I think we are victims, but not just that simple, but we are definitely innovators. There's an invitation for being innovative here, but also to really not ask for a seat on the table. I think to shake the table a bit, to ask uncomfortable questions, to also challenge ourselves. What I have noticed is that we want youth voices to be heard, right? I figure I told this studio and make sure that every trip to Paris or to every COP I go. And for some odd reason, there's very little that comes back to the people that you were representing there. I've hardly seen my comrades, young people who have made it to those conferences, come back to tell us exactly what happened, what did they do, what did they understand, what exactly, you know what I mean? So these were what was and so on, and this word didn't make it to the text and so on. Did you mention Bumala? Did you mention South African? I think that's quite important also for accountability purposes, because we can keep on saying young people need to be at the table, we need to hear their voices. But are they accountable? What are their accountability measures for these young people we are pushing up? Of course, we acknowledge that we won't be able, all of us, to go there. But who goes there? Is it me because I have speak English? Or is it someone who is able to facilitate leadership? It's not like we are just looking for money. It's a just thing. It's a justice issue. They are where they are because they landed our continent. So they need to pay. That's the standing. While we figure out how we also facilitate internally, how we move and protect ourselves. But that money needs to come. Polluters must pay. If you disagree with me, go jump in the nearest gift. The just transition narrative is very vague. It's not clear how Mpumalanga and Limpopo are transitioning really. We know that there are plans, but there's no tangible plan. This is what will happen in 5 years, you know what I mean? That step-by-step moment, okay, then the whole value chain, how do people move about? It's not there. And none of the people in power are sharing that. You could hear it in these rooms, or at least the intentions, but nothing on paper, which is worrisome. And I think as young people, we need to be very clear about that worry, but also lead on the plan, Pela. So it is funny plan, not a second plan. While see funny plan, let's have a draft. Something with now. Can you look at this? Will this work? We are currently with other colleagues. We are currently working on the model law for defending environmental defenders. I think when the people who are activists, they get shot and they just die and nothing happens. So because we've been trying to ask government, and then you know what the answer is? There is no law protecting, like specific law protecting environmental defenders. So we are crafting it. So that now they will need a new excuse once we submit this law. I think as young people, we need to have that in mind. Not only scream that we want demand things, but we also need to offer accountability, complexity. That whole complexity is uncomfortable, and sometimes feeling like I was good. But But once you pick one and run with it, you lose it. Whole complexity, as much as bad as it, as clumsy, it's messy. Let's be messy while we're moving forward. Right. Thank you so much.